Welcome to Cine Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice, from legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems. We explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Cine Facts, and step beyond the screen. While scouting ahead through dense forest, Glass unknowingly wanders into a nightmare. He gets too close to a grizzly bear protecting her cubs, and in an instant, she charges. Glass is slammed to the ground as claws tear through flesh and jaws crush bone. He manages to fire his rifle, but the animal keeps coming, bleeding and broken. He draws his knife and fights with raw desperation. The struggle sends both man and beast tumbling down a slope, and when it finally ends, Glass is left crushed beneath the massive, lifeless bear, his body shattered and barely clinging to life. When the trappers find him, he's a wreck, mangled, unconscious, and struggling for every breath. Believing he might still pull through, they build a crude stretcher and try to carry him through the wilderness, though progress is painfully slow. At one point, while hauling him uphill, Glass slips and drags the others down with him. To some, it's just bad luck. To Fitzgerald, it's proof that Glass is already a dead man. He argues that continuing on is pointless and dangerous, and that mercy now means ending Glass's suffering and saving the rest of the group. Captain Henry refuses to kill him outright. Instead, he offers $75 to anyone willing to stay behind, tend to Glass, and bury him when the time comes. No one steps forward until Henry raises the offer to $100. That's when Fitzgerald agrees, not out of compassion, but out of greed and resentment over the pelts he lost earlier. Young Jim Bridger also volunteers, along with Hawk, who refuses to leave his father behind. Before departing, Captain Henry makes Fitzgerald swear an oath to stay with Glass until the end and see that he gets a proper burial. The men part ways, unaware that this promise will soon be broken and that Hugh Glass's fight for survival has only just begun. Fitzgerald gives a silent nod, but out here, promises mean very little. As Captain Henry and the others disappear into the trees, Hugh Glass drifts in and out of awareness. Pain tears through him with every breath. His body is ruined, but his mind refuses to let go. Memories flood in, visions of his wife, their final moments together, the fire that swallowed their home. Survival isn't his only battle, he's also clinging to the last fragments of a life that's already been taken from him. Now alone with Bridger and Hawk, Fitzgerald finally sees his chance. He kneels beside the barely conscious Glass and murmurs words of false compassion, offering him an end to his suffering. He claims it would be better for everyone, for Glass, for Hawk, for the whole group. Glass can't answer, he can barely move, all he can do is stare. Fitzgerald twists the knife deeper. He tells Glass to blink if he agrees, fully aware that no man can keep his eyes open forever. Glass fights it, forcing his eyes wide with every ounce of strength he has left. But eventually, his lids close. Fitzgerald takes it as consent, or pretends to, and presses down, smothering Glass without hesitation. That's when Hawk returns and sees the nightmare unfolding. He panics and shouts for Bridger, but never gets the chance. Fitzgerald lunges and drives his blade into Hawk's stomach. The young man collapses, bleeding out in the snow. Glass, broken and voiceless, watches his son die inches away, helpless to intervene. Trapped inside his own shattered body, Fitzgerald drags Hawk's body away and erases the evidence. When Bridger arrives, shaken and confused, Fitzgerald coldly claims Hawk wandered off and never came back. With Glass unable to speak or even signal, the lie goes unchallenged. By morning, Fitzgerald pushes the betrayal even further. He tells Bridger that Arikara warriors are closing in fast and that staying means certain death. It's a lie, but fear doesn't need proof. Bridger hesitates, torn by doubt, but eventually agrees to leave. As he turns away, Fitzgerald pulls Glass toward a shallow grave, muttering hollow prayers while shoveling dirt over the still living man, burying him alive. Glass can't move, he can't scream, all he can feel is the crushing weight of betrayal as the soil steals his breath and the world fades to black. Before leaving, Bridger quietly places something beside Glass, a metal canteen etched with a spiral symbol, a small act of loyalty, guilt, and hope. Then they're gone, leaving Glass alone beneath the frozen earth. Against all odds, Glass claws his way out of the grave, tearing through the soil like a man reborn. But freedom brings no relief. Haunted by visions of his wife, he presses onward, only to discover Hawk's frozen body lying in the snow. His heart breaks, but his resolve hardens. Without a word, he makes a vow. He will not let this end here. Relying on nothing but instinct and sheer determination, Glass learns to survive all over again. He wraps himself in a bear pelt for warmth, chews on roots and scraps of bone marrow to stay alive, and fights through relentless pain. When a deep wound in his throat threatens to kill him, he packs it with gunpowder and sets it alight, sealing the flesh in a moment of brutal desperation. As Arikara warriors close in, still searching for their chief's missing daughter, Glass escapes by throwing himself into dangerous rapids, choosing the river over his enemies. He drifts onward, driven by pain, grief, and a burning hunger for justice. Meanwhile, as Fitzgerald and Bridger push toward Fort Kiowa, Bridger starts questioning everything as a supposed pursuit. The urgency, none of it adds up. He confronts Fitzgerald and forces the truth out of him. There were never any warriors chasing them. Rage erupts. Bridger raises his rifle, but Fitzgerald wrenches it away and pulls the trigger. The gun clicks empty. It was never loaded, just another lie. Their grim march continues until they reach the charred remains of a settlement. Bodies scattered among the ashes. A lone woman emerges from the ruins, hollow-eyed and silent. Bridger leaves food behind without a word, a small gesture of humanity in a world stripped of mercy. When they finally arrive at Fort Kiowa, Fitzgerald spins one last lie, telling Captain Henry that Glass succumbed to his wounds and that Hawk was likely killed by the Arikara. Bridger, weighed down by guilt and fear, says nothing. Fitzgerald collects his payment, pockets heavy with blood money, while Bridger refuses any extra reward, his silence already costing him more than he can bear. Back at the fort, Captain Henry delivers grim news. Supplies are running low, and the fort's funds are nearly drained. Reinforcements under Henry Leavenworth are still days away, and until they arrive, no one will get their promised pay. The air is thick with uneasy lies have already been told, trust has been broken, and betrayal is quietly spreading beneath the surface. Whatever this story is becoming, it's far from finished. Out in the wild, Hugh Glass pushes on alone. Weak, starving, and half-frozen, he stumbles into an icy river and, driven by pure instinct, catches a live fish with his bare hands. He eats it raw, desperate for strength. Climbing a nearby hill, he spots a Pawnee man feeding on the remains of a dead bison. The man's name is Hikuk, someone shaped by loss much like Glass himself. Glass approaches slowly and carefully, wordlessly asking for food. Hikuk tosses him a piece of bison organ, and Glass devours it without hesitation. By morning, Hikuk notices Glass's wounds are festering, infected, and nearly beyond saving, but he also sees something else, an unbreakable wall burning behind Glass's eyes. Though Hikuk carries his own grief, he offers guidance instead of anger, telling Glass that vengeance belongs to the Creator. Bound by shared pain and survival, the two men ride together across the brutal landscape. As a violent storm rolls in, Hikuk builds a sweat lodge to protect Glass, who is slipping into fever. Inside the smoky shelter, he performs a sacred healing ritual, calling on ancient prayers and spirits. Glass drifts into a dreamlike state, caught between agony and hope. When he finally emerges, the storm has passed and, astonishingly, his wounds have begun to heal. The peace is short-lived. Nearby, French-Canadian trappers capture Hikuk and hang him, a swift, merciless cruelty, another reminder that danger stalks every corner of the frontier. Glass is left alone again, his grief hardening into something far more dangerous. That night, Glass slips silently into the hunters' camp, where he witnesses their leader, Tisan, violently assaulting Pauaka. Without hesitation, he attacks and frees her. In a shocking reversal, Pauaka takes her own revenge, mutilating Tisan before fleeing into the wilderness. Glass kills several of the hunters, releases their horses, including Hakuks, and leaves behind Bridger's engraved canteen as a quiet message for anyone who understands its meaning. But suffering isn't finished with him yet. The following day, Glass is ambushed by Arikara warriors and forced over a cliff while on horseback. A tree breaks his fall and saves his life, but his horse is killed. As night closes in and the cold turns unbearable, Glass makes an unthinkable choice. He cuts open the horse's carcass and crawls inside it for shelter against the freezing darkness. At dawn, he drags himself free and finds refuge in a snow cave, where he carves words into stone and ice, a declaration born of pain and fury. Fitzgerald killed my son. What began as survival has become a mission fueled by vengeance. Back at Fort Kiowa, tension explodes when a lone French trapper arrives carrying Bridger's cantina, the same one believed lost with Hawke. Captain Henry immediately orders a search party and rides out to find Glass. Meanwhile, Fitzgerald realizes the truth. Glass is alive. Seizing the moment, he steals the fort's payroll and flees into the wilderness. The search party eventually finds Glass near the Yellowstone River, battered but breathing, and rushes him back to the fort. Henry, furious and betrayed, accuses Bridger of treachery, but Glass intervenes, making it clear that Fitzgerald's lies are at the root of everything that's gone wrong. Burning with the need for vengeance, Glass demands to join the hunt for the man who destroyed his life. As they split up to track Fitzgerald, tragedy strikes again. Glass discovers Henry's body, scalped and lifeless, a brutal reminder of Fitzgerald's ruthlessness. Hiding his pain, Glass pretends to be dead and waits. When the moment is right, he strikes, ambushing Fitzgerald and shooting him in the shoulder. The pursuit ends along a riverbank, where the two men collide in a savage, desperate fight. Blood, rage, and survival blur together as they struggle. Glass gains the upper hand and prepares to kill him, but then Haku's words come back to him. Vengeance belongs to the Creator. Instead of delivering the final blow, Glass shoves Fitzgerald into the rushing river. The current carries him straight into the hands of the Arikara chief, Elk Dog, and Pauaka. They exact their own justice swiftly, killing Fitzgerald and sparing Glass. Exhausted and broken, Glass collapses by the river. In that quiet moment between life and death, he sees a vision of his wife. She smiles gently at him, then fades into the trees, a silent goodbye, a sign that his long, brutal journey is finally over. Some movies entertain you, some impress you, and then there are movies that test you. The Revenant isn't a film you simply watch, it's a film you endure. From the very first frame, it pulls you into a frozen world where survival is never guaranteed, pain is constant, and nature doesn't care who you are. There are no heroic speeches here, no comforting music promising that everything will be okay, just wind, blood, breath, and the terrifying silence of the wilderness. What makes The Revenant stand out isn't just its brutal realism, it's the way the film strips cinema down to its rawest form. Every injury feels real, every step through the snow feels exhausting, and every moment reminds you how fragile a human life truly is. This isn't just a story about survival, it's a story about refusing to die even when everything, including your own body, is telling you to give up. In this piece, we're breaking down The Revenant, from its haunting themes and hidden symbolism to its unforgettable ending, and looking at why it remains one of the most intense cinematic experiences ever made. So brace yourself, because this journey through ice, pain, and obsession isn't an easy one, but it's one you won't forget. Released in 2015, The Revenant is directed by Alejandro Gonz !Les I +/- Ritu, a filmmaker known for pushing both actors and audiences far outside their comfort zones. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio in one of the most physically punishing roles of his career, a performance so demanding it would go on to define his legacy. But this isn't a typical star-driven movie. Here, the landscape shares the spotlight just as much as the actors. The story is set in the early 1800s, deep in the American frontier, a time when the land was wild, lawless, and brutally unforgiving. Civilization barely exists. Survival depends on instinct, endurance, and luck. At its core, the Revenant follows a seasoned frontiersman who joins a fur-trapping expedition through hostile territory. When a devastating incident leaves him gravely injured and stranded in the wilderness, the film shifts into a relentless survival journey, one driven by sheer willpower and an unbreakable connection to life itself. What's important to understand is this: the film isn't about plot twists or clever dialogue. It's about presence. It places you directly into the cold, the hunger, and the isolation, asking you to experience survival moment by moment. No spoilers here, just know that The Revenant is less about where the story goes and more about what it costs to keep going. And that's what makes this film unforgettable. At first glance, The Revenant looks like a simple survival story, a man versus nature, life against impossible odds. But that's only the surface. This film sits at the intersection of three powerful genres: survival, historical drama, and revenge. And instead of leaning into spectacle, it strips each one down to its most uncomfortable truth. Survival here isn't heroic, it's ugly, painful, and humiliating. Staying alive doesn't make the character noble, it just makes him desperate. Every decision is driven by instinct, not courage. Revenge, meanwhile, isn't portrayed as justice, it's portrayed as a burden, a fire that keeps the body moving while slowly consuming everything else: morality, peace, and identity. And then there's nature. Nature isn't a backdrop in this film, it's the dominant force, silent, indifferent, relentless. The cold doesn't hate you. The river doesn't care about your past. Survival is never earned, only temporarily allowed. Emotionally, the film is bleak and meditative. Dialogue is sparse because words are unnecessary. Pain, breath, and movement do the talking. The tone demands patience, asking the audience to sit with suffering rather than escape from it. This isn't a film made for casual viewing, it's for audiences willing to slow down, lean in, and sit with discomfort. Because The Revenant isn't asking whether revenge is justified, it's asking whether it's worth surviving for, and that question echoes through every frozen frame. The story begins in chaos. A fur-trapping expedition pushes deep into hostile wilderness, a land that doesn't belong to them and never pretends to be safe. From the very start, danger surrounds them, from the environment, from hostile tribes, and from the simple reality that one mistake here can mean death. At the center of the group is Hugh Glass, a seasoned frontiersman who understands the land better than most. But experience offers no protection when nature decides to strike. A sudden, brutal attack leaves Glass catastrophically injured, broken, bleeding, and barely alive. The expedition faces an impossible choice: carry a dying man and risk everyone, or leave him behind. Two men are assigned to stay with him until the end. What happens next isn't just abandonment, it's betrayal. Glass is left alone in a frozen wilderness with no weapons, no shelter, and no realistic chance of survival. And yet he refuses to die. What follows is a relentless journey across snow, rivers, and mountains. Glass crawls when he can't walk. He eats when food appears and suffers when it doesn't. Every step forward is paid for with pain. This isn't a montage of survival victories, it's a chain reaction of cause and effect. Injury leads to isolation. Isolation leads to desperation. Desperation fuels movement. And beneath every action is a single driving force, not heroism, not glory, but survival mixed with unresolved rage. The story unfolds slowly and deliberately, forcing us to feel time the way Glass feels it, measured not in days, but in breaths taken and pain endured. This isn't a journey toward triumph, it's a journey toward staying alive long enough to confront the truth of what was taken. And every frozen mile pushes that purpose closer, at a terrible cost. After everything he endures, at the cold, the wounds, the hunger, the betrayal, and the Revenant doesn't give us the ending we expect. The final confrontation finally arrives, the moment the entire journey has been building toward. Revenge is within reach. Justice, if we can call it that, is right there. But instead of delivering a clean, satisfying victory, the film deliberately pulls away from it. Rather than taking control of the final outcome, the protagonist lets go. He releases his obsession and allows nature, along with fate, to decide what justice looks like. This choice marks a turning point. Survival, not revenge, becomes the final act of strength. Symbolically, this moment captures everything the film has been trying to tell us. Revenge kept him alive, but it could never give him peace. The wilderness, which has punished him throughout the story, now becomes the judge. The same indifferent force that nearly killed him now brings the journey to its end, without triumph, without celebration. Then comes the final shot. Hugh Glass looks directly into the camera. It's not a victorious stare, it's not relief, it's exhaustion, and something close to emptiness. That look breaks the distance between character and audience, asking us a silent question: was it worth it? The ending is intentionally unresolved, not because the story lacks closure, but because survival itself is the conclusion. There's no reward waiting on the other side, just breath, just life. The Revenant ends the only way it honestly can, not with revenge fulfilled, but with a man who has survived everything and is left to live with it. One of the most powerful things about The Revenant is how much it says without ever speaking. This film hides its meaning in visuals, movement, and silence, rewarding viewers who pay close attention. First, there's nature. Nature isn't just a setting here, it's a silent judge. Wide shots constantly dwarf the characters, reminding us that no matter how strong or determined a person feels, the wilderness remains indifferent. The snow doesn't pause for grief. The river doesn't care about revenge. This visual scale quietly reinforces the film's core idea. Humans don't conquer nature, they only temporarily survive it. Then there's the recurring imagery of breath. We constantly see Hugh Glass breathing heavily into the cold air, each breath visible, fragile, and temporary, a reminder that life itself is thin, something that can disappear at any moment. Breath equals existence, and the film never lets us forget how close he is to losing it. Fire is another key symbol. Whenever it appears, it represents survival, memory, and human presence in an otherwise hostile world. Fire keeps Glass alive, but it also reminds him of what he's lost, a warmth and pain existing side by side. There's also strong spiritual symbolism throughout the film. Glass experiences visions that blur the line between life and death. These moments suggest rebirth rather than recovery, as if he's not simply surviving but being reshaped, less a man returning to society and more a soul passing through suffering. And finally, there's foreshadowing. Danger often arrives silently, a calm river before chaos, a quiet forest before violence. The film teaches us to fear stillness, because in this world, peace never lasts long. None of these details are explained to us, they're felt, and that's what makes The Revenant so powerful. It doesn't guide you by the hand, it asks you to observe, endure, and interpret, just like its protagonist does. The deeper you look, the more the wilderness starts speaking back. What makes The Revenant even more incredible is knowing that much of what you see was just as brutal to film as it looks on screen. This movie wasn't created in a studio, it was survived. Director Alejandro González les I plus minus Rit made a bold and controversial decision. The film would be shot almost entirely using natural light. That meant the crew had only a few hours each day to shoot, racing against the sun, the cold, and the weather. Temperatures regularly dropped far below freezing. Equipment failed. Crew members quit. Entire locations had to be abandoned when the snow melted too quickly. forcing production to move to different countries just to keep the environment authentic. And then there's Leonardo DiCaprio. This role demanded extreme physical commitment. He endured freezing rivers, harsh terrain, and prolonged exposure to the elements. Many scenes required him to perform while exhausted, injured, and uncomfortable, mirroring the suffering of his character rather than simply acting it. The result was a performance so raw and uncompromising that it finally earned DiCaprio his first Academy Award for Best Actor, an Oscar that felt less like recognition and more like survival payback. Even the film's realism came at a cost. Long takes, handheld cameras, and minimal dialogue meant mistakes couldn't be hidden. If something went wrong, the entire sequence had to be redone, often under even worse conditions. There are no shortcuts in the Revenant, and no green screens to soften the struggle, no safety nets to cushion the pain, and that's why the film feels so real. Behind every frozen frame, there's a crew, a cast, and a production that endured the wilderness so the story could feel truly earned. When people talk about The Revenant, it's often compared to other survival films, but those comparisons only go so far. Yes, on the surface it shares DNA with movies like Castaway or Into the Wild. All of them explore isolation, endurance, and the human will to survive. But where those films lean toward introspection and hope, The Revenant chooses suffering and resistance. There's no comfort in solitude here, no peace in nature, only persistence. It's also frequently compared to classic revenge films, but this is where The Revenant deliberately breaks the mold. Traditional revenge stories build toward a moment of emotional release where justice feels earned and satisfying. The Revenant refuses that reward. Revenge isn't empowering here, it's corrosive. It keeps the body moving but drains the soul. Instead of glorifying vengeance, the film questions whether it's worth surviving for at all. Stylistically, it's often placed alongside epic historical films like Braveheart or The Last of the Mohicans. But unlike those stories, heroism here is stripped of romance. There are no speeches, no rallying cries, no cinematic victories, just breath, blood, and motion. What The Revenant does better than most films in its genre is immersion. The camera doesn't observe from a distance, it suffers alongside the character. Long takes, natural lighting, and minimal dialogue pull the audience into the experience rather than letting them watch safely from the outside. But this approach comes with a trade-off. Compared to more traditional narratives, the pacing can feel slow. The film demands patience, it doesn't entertain, it confronts, and that's the difference. The Revenant isn't trying to be the most exciting survival movie ever made, it's trying to be the most honest. And whether you admire it or struggle with it, there's nothing else quite like it. When The Revenant was released, it didn't just spark conversation that divided audiences. Critics largely praised the film as a cinematic achievement. The cinematography was hailed as breathtaking, the realism was admired, and Leonardo DiCaprio's performance was almost universally recognized as one of the most physically demanding roles ever put on screen. Awards followed quickly, Oscar buzz turned into Oscar wins, and the film secured its place as a prestige cinematic event. But audience reactions told a more complicated story. Some viewers were completely absorbed, calling it intense, immersive, and unforgettable for them. The slow pacing and minimal dialogue weren't flaws, they were essential to the experience. Others felt pushed away, finding the film exhausting, too cold, too slow, too punishing. Some expected a traditional revenge story and were surprised to find something far more meditative and restrained. And that's where The Revenant truly stands out. It was never designed to please everyone. Over time, the film has settled into a unique position in cinema history, not as a crowd pleaser, but as a challenge. A film that rewards patience and punishes distraction. Is it overrated? Only if you expect entertainment first. Is it underrated? Not by critics, but perhaps by viewers who haven't revisited it with the right expectations. The Revenant is divisive by design, and that division is part of its legacy. It's remembered not for universal love, but for the intensity of the reactions it provoked, and sometimes that's the mark of something truly powerful. So, after all the suffering, all the silence, All the frozen miles endured, what is The Revenant really worth? At its best, this film is a technical and emotional achievement. The cinematography is breathtaking, the performances are raw and physically committed, and the atmosphere is so immersive it almost feels less like a movie and more like an experience you survive. But it's not without flaws. The pacing is slow by design, and that patience won't work for everyone. Dialogue is minimal, emotion is restrained, and the film demands your full attention. If you're looking for comfort, escape, or easy entertainment, this isn't that movie. However, if you're drawn to serious cinema, if you appreciate storytelling through visuals rather than words, if you're willing to sit with discomfort in exchange for authenticity, then The Revenant is absolutely worth your time. This is a film for viewers who value immersion over excitement, for those who don't need a clean victory to feel satisfied, for those who understand that survival itself can be the story. The Revenant doesn't ask to be loved, it asks to be respected, and in the end, that's exactly what it earns. If you've never seen it, watch it once without distractions. If you have, watch it again knowing what it truly is. Because some films fade when the credits roll, and others, like The Revenant, stay with you long after the cold has settled in. Reviews: The Revenant stands out as one of the finest films of 2015, fully earning the praise and attention it received. While audience reactions have been mixed, I personally feel the harsh criticism and low ratings are unfair. Even if the film hadn't resonated with me emotionally, its sheer technical brilliance alone would still justify a solid score. The cinematography, direction, and performances are simply too accomplished to ignore. Visually, the film is extraordinary. It's among the most stunningly photographed movies of its year, capturing raw wilderness with a level of realism that feels almost overwhelming. The natural lighting, atmospheric locations, and immersive camera work pull the viewer directly into the harsh world the characters inhabit. Alejandro González inverted exclamation mark les I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. Ritchie's direction surpasses even his impressive work on Birdman, delivering some of the strongest filmmaking of the year. The performances are equally compelling. Leonardo DiCaprio gives a physically and emotionally exhausting performance that finally earned him his long-awaited Oscar, and deservedly so. With minimal dialogue, he relies heavily on expression, movement, and sheer presence to convey suffering, determination, and grief, and it works powerfully. Tom Hardy delivers a tense, menacing turn, while Will Poulter also leaves a strong impression. Every actor commits fully to the brutal environment and tone of the story. Beyond the visuals and acting, the film's action sequences are intense and unforgiving, especially the opening ambush, which throws the audience straight into chaos. The camera placement and framing make these scenes feel disorienting and frightening, capturing the sudden violence of survival in hostile territory. Weapons that are often treated casually in other films feel genuinely dangerous here, adding to the realism and tension. The narrative itself is deliberately simple and slow-moving, but that restraint allows the emotional weight to settle. The characters feel grounded and believable, shaped by desperation and isolation. If the film falters anywhere, it's in the script, which can occasionally feel uneven or slightly unfocused, but this is a minor flaw that does little to diminish the overall impact. The story is inspired by the real-life figure Hugh Glass, and while the film clearly exaggerates events for dramatic effect, it still captures the spirit of endurance and revenge associated with the legend. Some historical liberties are obvious, and at times the film may push plausibility too far. Had the character been entirely fictional, these excesses might have been easier to accept, but handling historical inspiration in cinema is always a delicate balance. What frustrates me most is the dismissive one-star criticism the film has received from some viewers. Disliking a movie is one thing, but reducing its rating simply because of its popularity or awards buzz feels intellectually lazy. The Revenant demands to be judged on its craftsmanship, not resented for its success. Set in the early 19th century American frontier, the film explores a period rarely portrayed with such intensity. Survival during this era feels raw and evenly matched. Long before technological advantages tip the balance, the harsh winter landscapes dominate the screen so completely that the environment itself becomes a central character. Cold, unforgiving, and relentless. DiCaprio carries the film almost entirely on his shoulders, appearing in nearly every scene and conveying emotion through physical endurance rather than dialogue. His performance recalls other deeply personal cinematic portrayals where the actor becomes inseparable from the character's suffering. The Oscar win wasn't just justified, it felt inevitable. In the end, The Revenant is a brutal yet mesmerizing experience. It's not an easy film to watch, but it is a powerful one, visually breathtaking, emotionally draining, and technically masterful. It stands as one of the most striking survival dramas ever put on screen. Not long after Hugh Glass is gravely injured, the man assigned to stay behind and protect him ultimately abandons his duty, betraying Glass and murdering someone deeply important to him. This act of cruelty sets the stage for a harsh and relentless journey driven by revenge. Director Alejandro González Ritu has rapidly established himself as one of the most visually striking filmmakers working today, and this film continues that upward trajectory. Much like his previous effort Birdman, this project pushes his visual ambition even further, resulting in a film that feels distinctive and immersive despite telling a story that has existed in many forms before. At its core, this is a familiar tale of survival and vengeance, one cinema has revisited countless times. However, audiences today are unlikely to feel fatigued by it, since this particular style of frontier western has been largely absent from modern filmmaking. While some may hesitate to label it a traditional western, the brutal Native American attack, the infamous bear encounter, and the unforgiving final confrontation firmly place it within that genre, albeit in a raw, unconventional form. The film's greatest strength lies in its breathtaking imagery. The natural landscapes are captured with astonishing realism, creating an experience that feels physically demanding even for the viewer. Equally impressive are the performances from Leonardo DiCaprio and Tom Hardy. Both actors fully inhabit their roles, but Hardy in particular delivers a chilling portrayal of a morally bankrupt man whose cruelty feels disturbingly authentic. His performance relies less on dialogue and more on presence, making his few spoken words carry significant weight. DiCaprio, meanwhile, delivers a restrained yet committed performance, conveying pain and determination largely through expression rather than speech. While it may not rank among his absolute best work, it remains a powerful demonstration of his dedication to physically demanding roles. The environments themselves function almost as characters. The frozen wilderness feels hostile and unforgiving, and Rita succeeds in making the audience feel every ounce of Glass's suffering. The now famous bear attack is executed with startling intensity, and the film's uncompromising violence adds to its realism rather than feeling gratuitous. Visually, it stands as one of the most striking films of 2015, supported by two commanding lead performances. Inspired by real events, the film presents a rugged and visceral account of endurance and revenge. Glass, a fur trapper, survives both an attack by native tribes and a brutal mauling by a grizzly bear. Left for dead by his companions, including the cold-hearted John Fitzgerald, he endures unimaginable hardship in order to seek justice. Shot primarily using natural light, the cinematography is exceptional, and the digital effects used during the bear sequence are impressively seamless. Despite these achievements, the film isn't without flaws. While technically accomplished, it sometimes feels excessively long and emotionally distant. The near-total absence of meaningful female roles is noticeable, with one of the few such characters depicted in an especially disturbing context. Although the performances are intense, the film can feel strangely hollow beneath its surface brutality. Certain narrative decisions, particularly involving the pursuit of Fitzgerald near the conclusion, come across as implausible and underdeveloped, seemingly engineered to force a final confrontation rather than arising organically from the story. Following his major award success the previous year, Ritu quickly returned with another prestige project that garnered widespread attention. The film went on to earn significant accolades, including major wins at the Golden Globes, and it appeared to finally position DiCaprio for long-awaited Oscar recognition. Running over 2.5 hours, the film unfolds across a snowbound American frontier, dividing its focus between Glass's desperate fight to stay alive and the actions of the men who left him behind. Tom Hardy's antagonist proves especially compelling. He's portrayed not merely as a villain but as a deeply flawed outsider, greedy, ruthless, and resentful of Glass's resilience and leadership. A particularly memorable moment occurs when another character threatens him with a rifle, only for the weapon to fail, revealing Fitzgerald's cynical understanding of human weakness. This layered characterization adds depth to what could have been a one-note antagonist. In the end, the film stands as a brutal, visually stunning exploration of survival, revenge, and endurance. While its ambition and craftsmanship are undeniable, its emotional impact may leave some viewers cold, making it a powerful yet imperfect cinematic experience. This isn't a story with a single, clear-cut villain. Looking at Leonardo DiCaprio's work here, what stands out most is how intensely physical the performance is. It's almost entirely nonverbal, relying far more on body language and endurance than dialogue. He speaks very little throughout the film, occasionally using fragments of a native language, which reinforces how isolated and stripped back the experience feels. The infamous bear attack is without question one of the most unforgettable sequences of 2015 cinema. A harrowing, brutal, and deeply uncomfortable to watch, yet impossible to turn away from. That said, some of the moments involving his indigenous companion and the broader Native American elements didn't resonate as strongly with me as they could have. I felt they lacked emotional depth and missed an opportunity to leave a stronger impact. Still, the filmmakers accomplished something impressive by crafting such a lengthy film that rarely feels sluggish. Despite its runtime, it maintains momentum almost the entire way through. This is very much a film made for the cinema. The vast frozen wilderness dominates every frame, creating a harsh and immersive atmosphere that feels overwhelming in the best way. The snow-covered landscapes are unforgiving, bleak, and stunning, and they play a huge role in shaping the mood. It wouldn't be surprising to see the cinematography rewarded again, as the visual craftsmanship is outstanding. Even though this wouldn't rank among my personal favorites of that year, it remains a gripping experience, and DiCaprio's commitment alone makes it worth seeing. It was also refreshing to see Domhnall Gleeson in a more sympathetic role. He continues to prove his versatility as an actor. The final close-up of DiCaprio staring directly into the camera lingers long after the film ends, quiet, unsettling, and deeply haunting. I had known about this 2015 release for years but didn't finally sit down to watch it until 2023. I've never been particularly drawn to DiCaprio's work, so there was no strong urge to seek it out sooner. After spending over 2.5 hours with the film, I can honestly say it didn't feel like I had missed a defining cinematic milestone. It was engaging enough and competently made, but not something I found extraordinary or memorable enough to revisit. The script, crafted by Mark L. Smith, Alejandro G. Ritu, and Michael Punk, is solid and functional, delivering a narrative that serves its purpose without doing much beyond that. The film is effective while it's on, but I doubt it will ever compel me to watch it again. Visually, however, it excels. The staging, action choreography, and overall design convincingly place the viewer in a harsh frontier world. The cinematography does much of the heavy lifting, bringing the environment and the ordeal vividly to life. The bear encounter in particular stands out for its raw intensity and realism. The supporting cast is adequate, though character development is fairly limited across the lengthy runtime, which leaves the experience feeling somewhat shallow on a narrative level. Performances overall are strong. DiCaprio handles the demanding lead role well, but for me, The standout performance belongs to Tom Hardy. His portrayal is layered, engaging, and far more memorable, ultimately giving the film much of its emotional weight. It's unfortunate that actors like Brendan Fletcher and Christopher Joner weren't given more substantial material to work with. This film arrived during awards season, a time when studios often push out serious, physically demanding productions clearly aimed at recognition. Whether it falls into the category of truly great or merely important is debatable. What's undeniable is that the cast and crew endured real hardship during production. The freezing locations and punishing conditions feel authentic on screen, and that realism pays off. The sense of survival, the constant brutality, and the contrast between fragile human figures and the overwhelming natural world form the film's strongest core. Technically, the movie is impressive throughout, from the early bear sequence to the sweeping camera movements across icy landscapes. The film balances intimate chaos with grand scale remarkably well. Much of the story unfolds with minimal dialogue as the protagonist claws his way back from the edge of death in pursuit of revenge. While this journey is grueling and intentionally exhausting, it can also feel demanding for the viewer. The pacing is slow, deliberate, and relentlessly effective, but hardly comforting. It's not a film you casually put on to unwind. Still, despite its slow crawl, the time never truly felt wasted to me. Its unwavering brutality and focused vision kept me engaged, even if I was never deeply invested in the finer details of the characters themselves. Ultimately, the film works less as a traditional character study and more as an immersive survival experience, unified by recurring themes of loss, endurance, and the bond between parents and children. The idea of revenge may drive the story forward, but it's only one layer of what the film explores. Beneath it lies a deeper focus on survival, loss, and instinct, reflected not only in the actions of the protagonist but also in the presence of the Native American groups who play a crucial role in shaping the narrative. Even the infamous bear attack can be seen as an act of parental protection rather than senseless violence. While this thematic angle is intriguing, it doesn't always land as powerfully as intended. At times, the revenge arc feels more like a mechanical device pushing the story ahead, and the dreamlike spiritual connection to the protagonist's deceased wife does little to strengthen its emotional impact. Another parental storyline, involving a father searching for his daughter, adds limited emotional weight. Ironically, the most affecting relationship in the entire film turns out to be that of the bear cubs left behind after their mother's death, a moment that resonates more strongly than many of the human connections on display. The cast convincingly embodies the harsh brutality of the setting, wearing the physical and emotional toll naturally. While Leonardo DiCaprio rightfully draws attention, the supporting performances are equally compelling. In fact, one could argue that Tom Hardy steals much of the spotlight, delivering the most memorable dialogue and portraying the most clearly defined character. Many of the film's standout moments revolve around him. Still, the true star of the film is its technical execution. Visually striking and meticulously crafted, the movie excels in atmosphere, sound design, and environmental realism. These elements elevate the experience, making it gripping and immersive even when character development occasionally falls short. The film succeeds most as a raw depiction of humanity's struggle against nature rather than as a deeply personal character study. Set in the early 1800s, the story follows Captain Andrew Henry, explorer Hugh Glass, and a fur-trapping expedition that comes under attack by Native Americans. Only a handful survive, escaping by river with the animal pelts, gravely injured and presumed dead after a brutal bear attack. Glass is abandoned by his companions. Left behind without burial, he clings to life with a single driving purpose: revenge, particularly against John Fitzgerald, the man who ensured his abandonment. They believed he was finished. They hoped he was gone. They were wrong. What follows is a relentless test of endurance as Glass crawls through frozen wilderness, fueled by survival instinct and sheer willpower. Blood is lost, life is rediscovered, and the boundary between death and rebirth blurs. Revenge and survival form the backbone of this intense narrative. Loosely inspired by Michael Punk's novel, the film dramatizes the ordeal of the real-life trapper Hugh Glass. Though historical details about his personal life remain uncertain, the film takes creative liberties, as there's no confirmed record of a wife or children. The story of Hugh Glass has been adapted before, most notably in Man in the Wilderness, 1971, starring Richard Harris. Interest in that earlier film resurfaced following the success of The Revenant, leading to its Blu-ray release in 2016. The broader theme of one man battling the unforgiving wilderness has also appeared in other films like Jeremiah Johnson and A Man Called Horse, reinforcing its enduring appeal. The Revenant contains numerous powerful scenes and unflinching depictions of violence, yet it maintains a restrained rating despite its intensity. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers a physically punishing and emotionally raw performance, portraying Glass with relentless commitment. His dedication included performing his own stunts under extreme conditions, earning him widespread acclaim and multiple awards. Tom Hardy's portrayal of the ruthless Fitzgerald is equally effective, earning him critical recognition. Strong supporting performances round out the cast, enhancing the film's credibility and depth. Ultimately, The Revenant stands as a visually stunning and technically masterful film. While its characters may not always reach the emotional depth promised, its portrayal of survival, vengeance, and humanity's fragile place within nature makes it a compelling and unforgettable cinematic experience. The film is further elevated by its haunting musical score from Ryuichi Sakamoto and Alvin Otto, paired with the breathtaking, award-winning cinematography of Mexican maestro Emmanuel Lubezki. Alejandro G. Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark Ritu, who co-wrote the script with Mark Smith, delivers a visually striking and emotionally relentless experience. Known for films like Hammer Sparrows, Babel, 21 Grams, Beautiful, and Birdman, Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark Ritu once again proves his ability to craft stories that are both brutal and mesmerizing. There are very few moments in this film that let the audience breathe out. The intensity rarely lets up. The story opens with a vicious attack by Native American warriors, and before the shock of that sequence can fully settle, the film launches into the widely publicized and harrowing bear attack involving Leonardo DiCaprio's character. While I've never been particularly fond of DiCaprio, it's impossible to ignore the sheer physical and emotional commitment he brings to this role. His Best Actor win feels fully justified. Before watching the film, I assumed it would sweep the top awards, but after seeing it, I understand why it may not have been an easy choice for every Academy voter. This isn't a comfortable viewing experience. Several scenes, especially those depicting the aftermath of the bear mauling, are deeply unsettling and hard to watch. The injuries Glass sustains are so severe they call to mind the graphic suffering depicted in The Passion of the Christ, making the viewer question how any human being could endure such trauma, particularly while exposed to freezing temperatures and unforgiving wilderness. Throughout the film, the audience is constantly reminded of how hostile the environment is as Glass struggles through brutal terrain driven by a single purpose: survival and revenge. At its core, the film is a powerful statement on human endurance, a reflection of Glass's refusal to surrender, no matter the odds. The word revenant itself refers to someone who returns, either from the brink of death or in a more supernatural sense, as a ghost. That definition perfectly encapsulates the spirit of this story. My excitement for the film began months before its release and only grew stronger as it collected nominations and awards, backed by the reputation of Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark Ritu, an Oscar, BAFTA, and Golden Globe winning director. Inspired by real events and set in 1823, the film unfolds in the untamed wilderness of the Louisiana Purchase. A quasi-military group of trappers led by Captain Andrew Henry, Domhnall Gleeson, is on a fur hunting expedition when they're ambushed by members of the Arikara tribe. Only half the group manages to escape by raft, salvaging what supplies they can while under constant threat of pursuit. During the retreat, seasoned frontiersman Hugh Glass, Leonardo DiCaprio, becomes separated from the others and unknowingly wanders into the territory of a mother grizzly and her cubs. The resulting attack leaves Glass brutally injured and barely alive. Though he manages to kill the bear, his wounds are catastrophic. The group does what little it can to treat him, transporting him on a crude stretcher that slows their progress. Tensions rise when John Fitzgerald, Tom Hardy, suggests putting Glass out of his misery. Captain Henry can't bring himself to do it, instead offering payment to anyone willing to stay behind with the dying man. Glass's son Hawk, Forrest Goodluck, and the young Jim Bridger, Will Poulter, volunteer, and Fitzgerald eventually joins them. After Henry increases the reward, Fitzgerald assures him that Glass will be cared for and buried properly once he passes. However, once the group separates, Fitzgerald attempts to kill Glass by suffocation. Hawk witnesses the act and is murdered by Fitzgerald while Glass, unable to speak or move, watches helplessly. When Bridger returns, Fitzgerald lies, claiming Hawk was taken by Native Americans. Though doubtful, Bridger ultimately agrees to abandon Glass, leaving him in a shallow grave with only a canteen marked by a carved spiral. Against all expectations, Glass survives. Weak, wounded, and alone, he drags himself through the wilderness, feeding on roots and raw survival instinct. The same Arikara tribe continues to roam the area, their chief searching desperately for his kidnapped daughter. Glass narrowly escapes death multiple times, including a perilous journey down a freezing river. Meanwhile, Captain Henry and the remaining trappers reach a crumbling outpost. Fitzgerald and Bridger arrive later. Bridger realizes the truth but is intimidated into silence. Fitzgerald falsely reports Glass's death and Hawk's disappearance, collecting his payment, while Bridger refuses his share. Burdened by guilt, Hugh Glass crosses paths with Akuk, Arthur Red Cloud, a kind-hearted Pawnee tribesman who, like Glass, is driven by loss and a desire for justice. During a fierce snowstorm, Akuk helps him survive by building a shelter, but by morning, Glass discovers his companion has been brutally killed and left hanging by French fur trappers camped nearby. Continuing his journey, Glass intervenes to save a Native American girl from assault. Later learning she's the kidnapped daughter of the Arikara chief, he escapes with a horse stolen by the French. Though in the chaos, he unknowingly leaves behind his canteen with the distinctive spiral carving. Glass soon runs into hostile Arikara warriors and narrowly survives by leaping from a cliff. He kills the horse to escape and suffers even greater injuries, then endures the freezing night by taking shelter inside its hollowed-out carcass. At dawn, he drags himself free and finds refuge in a snow cave. Back at the outpost, the discovery of the spiral-marked canteen convinces Captain Henry that Glass may still be alive. Fitzgerald, realizing this as well, steals the contents of the safe and flees. Eventually, Henry's men locate Glass and bring him back. Henry, furious at Fitzgerald's betrayal, launches a search but fails to find him. Glass clears Bridger of wrongdoing, proving he was deceived, and Henry resolves to hunt Fitzgerald down. Despite his weakened condition, Glass insists on joining him. The two split up to corner Fitzgerald, but Henry is ambushed and killed. Glass later finds Henry's body and sets a trap of his own. Though wounded again, he pursues Fitzgerald to the river, where the two engage in a final, savage confrontation. At the last moment, Glass resists killing him, remembering Hakuk's words about letting revenge be claimed by fate. Instead, he sends the badly injured Fitzgerald downstream, where he's captured by the Arikara. Reunited with his daughter, the chief executes Fitzgerald and spares Glass. Though his vengeance is complete, Glass remains haunted by visions of his lost wife and son. The film features strong supporting performances from Paul Anderson, Christopher Joner, Joshua Berg, Lucas Haas, Brendan Fletcher, and Wayne Howard. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers a powerful, Oscar-winning performance as the battered frontiersman, fully embodying a man pushed to the edge by nature and betrayal. Tom Hardy is equally compelling as the ruthless Fitzgerald, making for a truly menacing antagonist. The supporting cast adds depth and realism throughout. Set against the unforgiving wilderness of 1820s America, this true inspired story of survival, revenge, and redemption is visually breathtaking. The cinematography is stunning, relying heavily on natural light to enhance the raw beauty and brutality of the environment. The emotional weight of watching one man battle freezing rivers, starvation, and relentless enemies is intense and unforgettable. The film earned widespread acclaim, winning major awards for its cinematography and sound, along with recognition for its visual effects, production design, and overall achievement. It stands as a gripping historical revenge epic and a testament to human endurance in the face of overwhelming odds. While the story takes liberties with historical accuracy, as many films based on true events do, that hardly diminishes its impact. From the thrilling opening ambush to the harrowing bear attack, filmed with shocking realism, the tension never lets up. Once Glass is left alone in the wilderness, the film masterfully conveys isolation and despair. You can almost feel the biting cold and exhaustion as he crawls through snow, icy rivers, and desperation itself. This is a brutal, immersive, and unforgettable cinematic experience. Outstanding. The performances across the board are strong, and it's hardly surprising that Leonardo DiCaprio finally earned his long-awaited Oscar for this role. His portrayal of Hugh Glass is intensely physical, and he clearly endured extreme conditions to bring the character to life. Tom Hardy is equally compelling as the ruthless Fitzgerald, delivering a chilling, memorable turn as the film's primary antagonist. Although the runtime stretches close to 2.5 hours, the pacing remains engaging, and at no point does the film feel like a chore to sit through. While some scenes are undeniably brutal and may be unsettling for sensitive viewers, the film as a whole is easy to recommend. Set in the early 1820s, the story follows a frontiersman on a fur-trading expedition who is savagely attacked by a bear and abandoned by members of his own crew, forcing him into a relentless struggle for survival. The legend of Hugh Glass has been reshaped many times over the past 2 centuries. There's the supposed true account, which can never be fully verified, followed by biographies, fictionalized retellings, and even an earlier adaptation from the early 1970s that remains oddly hard to find today. This latest interpretation takes creative liberties, most notably by introducing a son for Glass, a change that heightens the emotional stakes. Is this edition historically accurate? Probably not, but strict adherence to fact has rarely been a requirement for powerful storytelling. With awards season in full swing, the film quickly positioned itself as a dominant contender, boasting a double-digit number of nominations. It was almost guaranteed to walk away with multiple wins. Much of the attention centered on DiCaprio, whose career spans decades and includes a wide range of unforgettable performances. Some of his roles have been flashier than others, but his commitment has rarely wavered. As Glass, he delivers what many would consider the most demanding and impressive performance of his career. For long stretches of the film, he barely speaks, relying instead on physical expression and raw presence, an approach that requires tremendous skill and restraint. Award races, however, are rarely decided solely on difficulty or effort. They're meant to honor the best performance of a given year, not just a career milestone. Even by that standard, DiCaprio's chances were extremely strong. The competition was formidable, with respected performances from actors like Eddie Redmayne, Bryan Cranston, and Michael Fassbender, yet none seemed to push themselves quite as far in terms of physical and emotional endurance. In the supporting category, Tom Hardy earned well-deserved recognition for his work. His portrayal of Fitzgerald is vicious, morally bankrupt, and strangely captivating, in some moments even more entertaining than the leads. That said, the competition here was tougher, particularly due to an unexpected challenger whose nomination carried significant emotional and career-spanning weight. Award voters often factor in legacy and longevity, which can tip the scales in unpredictable ways. Hardy absolutely merited the win, but it was never a certainty. Beyond acting, the film also received nominations in areas such as makeup, costume design, and production design, categories where it stood a strong chance of success. One of its most outstanding technical achievements, however, lies in its cinematography. The visual work is breathtaking, capturing the harsh beauty of the wilderness with an immersive, almost tactile realism. Competing against equally impressive visual styles from other films made this category highly competitive, but the cinematographer had momentum on his side, having won in previous years. Given the complexity and ambition of the camera work here, another win was well within reach. Despite the overwhelming praise, there's one nomination that feels somewhat misplaced: Best Visual Effects. The infamous bear attack is expertly staged and convincingly animated, yet it's still obvious that the creature is digitally created. While the sequence is effective, the artificial nature of the bear briefly breaks the illusion, standing out against an otherwise grounded and naturalistic portrayal of the wilderness. It's a minor flaw in an otherwise remarkable film, but noticeable enough to slightly pull the viewer out of the experience. This category often feels like a consolation prize for films that don't quite fit the traditional Best Picture mold, and Star Wars may well take it regardless. That said, a bigger question hangs over this film: is this Leonardo DiCaprio's finest performance? The answer is almost certainly yes. It may also stand as Tom Hardy's most memorable role to date. Add to that some striking cinematography, and you have a serious contender for Film of the Year, though whether it truly earns that title is open to debate. Much has already been said about The Revenant, perhaps too much or perhaps not enough. What's undeniable is that DiCaprio finally earned his Oscar here, and many would argue the film itself deserved the top prize as well. Set in the harsh American wilderness of the early 1820s, the story follows fur trapper Hugh Glass, who is brutally attacked by a bear and left for dead near the frozen Missouri River. Against all odds, Glass survives and embarks on a relentless journey driven by survival and vengeance, particularly against John Fitzgerald, the trapper responsible for killing Glass's Pawnee son. Visually, the film is often breathtaking, though there are moments when the wilderness feels less isolated than intended. Still, it remains a striking experience to watch. Character motivations are clear, with little confusion about where the villainy lies. Some dialogue choices feel oddly modern for the period, which can be distracting. The infamous bear attack is nearly unbearable in its brutality, while the climactic final confrontation is equally savage and unforgettable. This is the kind of film that lingers, one many viewers will return to despite, or because of, its intensity. The supporting cast is equally committed, contributing to the film's overall authenticity and weight. The story itself is loosely inspired by real events. After Glass is mauled and abandoned, hostile forces close in, and his journey becomes one of raw endurance as much as revenge. Written and directed by Alejandro González !Les I !Ritu. The film marks a shift from his usual character-driven dramas into more physically demanding territory. His familiar stylistic flourishes, symbolism, dream imagery, fragmented memory are still present, though not always necessary. At times the dramatic elements feel stretched, while the action sequences appear designed to maintain momentum for modern audiences. Some action works brilliantly, reinforcing the danger and desperation. Other moments feel awkwardly inserted. Despite this unevenness, the story remains compelling. DiCaprio fully commits to the role, delivering a performance built more on physical suffering than dialogue. Hardy is effective as the antagonist, though his heavily altered voice can be frustrating. The landscape photography is extraordinary, but the film does lose momentum toward the end as pacing slows and additional threads add little to the outcome. The conclusion, while powerful, is largely expected. A persistent sense of cold seeps into every frame. This is a survival tale drenched in snow, water, and near impossible conditions. The environment itself becomes an enemy, merciless and unforgiving. Revenge is served with icy precision. The production itself mirrored the hardship on screen, with well-publicized challenges and risks taken during filming. I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. Ritchie's insistence on practical locations and natural light, avoiding green screens, resulted in a brutally authentic vision. The cinematography is a major reason for the film's acclaim. A vast white landscapes punctuated by sudden, shocking violence. It's not an easy watch, nor is it meant to be. DiCaprio's performance, built on endurance, pain, and sheer will, is more impressive than traditionally showy. It's a role that demands respect, even if it doesn't invite admiration in the usual sense. Across its lengthy runtime, the central performance rarely shifts gears, with the lead character behaving much the same from one sequence to the next. Tom Hardy's antagonist is similarly consistent, a menacing, coarse, and unapologetically brutal, offering little variation beyond his familiar habit of muttering dialogue through a thick, altered accent. As a whole, the film works reasonably well, though it occasionally stumbles over a hazy backstory that surfaces intermittently in an attempt to inject emotional weight. These moments lean heavily into dreamlike imagery and spiritual symbolism, sometimes feeling overly insistent. It's far from a masterpiece, but it remains a solid entry tailored squarely to its intended audience, one clearly not designed to court softer sensibilities. From a technical standpoint, the film is frequently stunning. The cinematography is extraordinary, a testament to Emmanuel Lubezki's mastery, and a clear reason his work continues to receive widespread recognition. Director Alejandro G. I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. It makes full use of the punishingly remote locations, captured in all their raw, unforgiving beauty. Considering the harsh environments in which this was filmed, the effort required from cast and crew alone is worthy of admiration. Complementing the visuals is exceptional production design, with period-accurate costumes, makeup, and sets that feel deeply textured and lived in. The action sequences rely heavily on practical effects and visceral stunt work, particularly during the film's bloody climax. While digital effects are used sparingly and effectively, the music further deepens the atmosphere. The score by Ryuichi Sakamoto and Alvin Otto is composed of haunting ambient tones that gnaw at the edges of the film, reinforcing the bleakness and isolation that define the protagonist's ordeal. That ordeal, the heart of the film, remains compelling throughout. After being brutally mauled by a bear and abandoned by his fellow trappers, frontiersman Hugh Glass must rely solely on his survival skills to traverse a merciless wilderness. Even as a basic premise, the concept is inherently gripping, and it's easy to see why the story has endured. Originally told in Michael Punk's novel, I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. Ritu and co-writer Mark L. Smith shaped this journey into a narrative filled with striking moments, some of which are genuinely unforgettable. The direction is restrained yet purposeful, allowing certain sequences to resonate with quiet power. Strong performances across the board from Leonardo DiCaprio, Tom Hardy, Domhnall Gleeson, and Will Poulter add emotional weight to characters who might otherwise feel one note. These are hardened individuals, but the actors bring a ferocity and vulnerability that elevate the material. It's easy to understand why The Revenant was met with such acclaim and awards recognition despite its relentless ugliness. Depictions of racism, extreme violence, and humanity's capacity for cruelty. It succeeds on its own terms. The film is as much about vengeance as it is about survival, and it never softens its portrayal of suffering, whether inflicted upon people, animals, or the land itself. That said, the brutality may prove overwhelming for some viewers, at times threatening to eclipse the narrative's emotional strengths. Even while acknowledging its achievements, a degree of unease lingers. Though Hugh Glass is positioned as a sympathetic figure, he remains part of a group actively exploiting land belonging to indigenous peoples, which complicates the audience's empathy. Some supporting characters receive modest depth through brief glimpses into their pasts, but ultimately this is a story centered on settlers, with Fitzgerald standing out as merely the worst among an already morally compromised group. The film's power is undeniable, yet its perspective invites scrutiny alongside admiration. Part of me couldn't help wishing the story had been told through the eyes of the Pawnee or the Arikara, and I'll admit, without shame, that I found myself rooting for the bear. While watching, my mind kept drifting to a satirical short by the comedy group 5 Second Films titled The Revenant, which pokes fun at the film and Leonardo DiCaprio's visibly agonized performance by labeling it classic Oscar bait. Though meant as a joke, the parody actually lands closer to the truth than one might expect. That said, I'm fully aware of how cynical I can be, and perhaps I'm being overly harsh. Regardless of any nitpicking, it's hard to deny that The Revenant is more often than not an exceptional film. I wouldn't argue that it's essential viewing, but whatever your reason for watching, it's undeniably impressive, provided the brutal and unsettling elements of the story don't put you off. I'd put off watching it for far too long, and I'm glad I finally did. The film absolutely earns the acclaim it's received, and I'm more than comfortable recommending it. One of my long-standing frustrations with modern Hollywood is how visually repetitive films have become. Bold primary colors dominate, action scenes are sliced into hyperactive edits, and intensified continuity techniques make sequences feel more like extended music videos than coherent storytelling. Add to that the sense that nearly every major production now features Tom Hardy, and you start feeling as though you've already seen every movie released this century. On top of all that, The Revenant comes from Alejandro González les I tilde plus minus a tilde Ritu, the filmmaker behind the highly praised, yet in my view overindulgent, Birdman. Everything about this project screamed award season bait, so I went in with very modest expectations. What followed was a genuine surprise. Mild spoilers ahead. I should apologize for calling the experience pleasant, because this film is anything but and that's not a criticism. If you're planning to see The Revenant solely because it stars Leonardo DiCaprio, don't say you weren't warned. This isn't a glamorous performance piece. Think of it as The Naked Prey reimagined for the modern era, where Cornel Wilde's 1966 film was constrained by the limitations of its time. Today's studio system pulls very few punches. If you're sensitive about animals or uncomfortable with the realities of survival and hunting, it might be best to steer clear. This film does not hold back. Ironically, it wasn't the animals that haunted me afterward, but the humans. I tilde plus minus a tilde Ritu achieves something genuinely remarkable here, crafting a deeply cinematic experience. I've struggled with his previous work, but this film stands apart as something truly memorable. The opening Native American attack is deeply unsettling, largely because it avoids standard Hollywood tricks and no frantic close-ups or rapid-fire edits, just raw, immersive chaos. The infamous bear attack is even more astonishing. It looks as though it unfolds in a single take, with a recognizable star, not a stunt double, being mauled by what feels like a very real animal. I found myself genuinely stunned, wondering how such a sequence was even possible. What's most impressive is that I never once felt like I was watching actors performing roles. Despite the star-studded cast, the characters feel authentic, people desperately trying to endure the twin, merciless forces of nature and human cruelty. Emmanuel Lubezki's cinematography deserves enormous praise. His cold, desaturated visuals perfectly capture the unforgiving wilderness. Stephen Merriam's editing is equally impressive, particularly in several underwater sequences that are so fluid and seamless it's easy to forget the immense effort required to pull them off. That said, the film isn't flawless. I tilde plus minus a tilde Ritu occasionally leans too heavily into his art house instincts, and at times the stylistic flourishes feel a bit excessive. Given the premise of a lone man battling a hostile environment, the narrative does lose some momentum in the final stretch. There's also a small but noticeable quirk that kept pulling me out of the story. Hugh Glass seems to possess an almost supernatural ability to make fire under any circumstances. I suppose we're meant to assume he's carrying flint, but in a landscape that's freezing, soaked, and unforgiving, finding usable kindling feels questionable at best. Still, These are small nitpicks rather than real problems. What stands out more to me are the many negative reactions surrounding this film. It makes me wonder whether some viewers were disappointed because the movie didn't match what they expected, rather than judging it for what it actually is. For my part, I found The Revenant to be an unrelentingly harsh and deeply gripping tale of survival. I have no hesitation in calling it the most powerful film I've seen this year so far. It feels destined to dominate awards season, and in my view, that recognition would be well earned. The word revenant is commonly defined as someone who returns after death or a long absence, and that meaning perfectly encapsulates the ordeal faced by Hugh Glass, portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio in Alejandro González les I plus minus Ritu's brutal frontier epic set in the unforgiving American wilderness of the early 1820s. The film follows Glass as he endures almost unimaginable suffering after being savagely mauled by a protective grizzly bear. Left broken and barely alive, he's horrified to discover that members of his own expedition abandon him, assuming his death is inevitable. Glass's astonishing struggle for survival unfolds during a doomed fur-trapping mission in territory that would later become part of South Dakota. The term grizzly applies not only to the ferocious bear that attacks him, but also to the relentless series of trials he must endure as he claws his way back towards civilization and seeks justice for what was done to him. While the story draws inspiration from a novel by Michael Punke, the real Hugh Glass was a genuine historical figure known for a life filled with danger and adventure, ranging from piracy and smuggling to trapping, trading, hunting, and exploring the American frontier. Director Ritutu focuses on this defining chapter of Glass's life and surrounds DiCaprio with a physically imposing supporting cast. This is a version of DiCaprio far removed from his slick or charismatic roles. Here he's stripped down to raw instinct and suffering. One of the film's greatest strengths is Tom Hardy's performance as John Fitzgerald, a character so cruel and selfish that he becomes genuinely infuriating to watch. Hardy fully commits to making Fitzgerald detestable, and he succeeds with chilling effectiveness. The natural world itself plays a crucial role in the film. Sweeping, awe-inspiring landscapes dwarf both hero and villain, emphasizing how insignificant human lives are in such a hostile environment. The production famously took nearly 9 months, with scenes filmed in sequence across multiple locations including remote regions of North and South America. Cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki worked closely with Ritu, relying entirely on natural light to give the film a raw, immersive realism that few movies attempt. The story begins with Hugh Glass serving as a guide for a fur trading expedition led by Captain Andrew Henry of the Rocky Mountain Fur Company. Early on, the group is attacked by Arikara warriors, resulting in heavy losses. Glass advises an overland retreat back to their fort, a plan that meets resistance but is ultimately followed. While scouting for food, Glass encounters 2 bear cubs, only moments before their enraged mother charges. The ensuing attack is savage and chaotic, leaving Glass torn apart but not yet dead. He manages to fire a single shot before being brutally mauled, eventually killing the bear in a final act of desperation. Gravely injured and unable to move on his own, Glass is carried by his fellow trappers until the terrain becomes impassable. Convinced that Glass won't survive, Captain Henry offers payment to anyone willing to remain behind and ensure he receives a proper burial. Fitzgerald and a young trapper, Jim Bridger, agree to stay, while Glass's Pawnee son, Hawk, refuses to abandon his father. What follows is a relentless test of endurance, loyalty, and the will to live. Eventually, Fitzgerald loses patience waiting for Glass to die from his injuries. In a ruthless turn, he murders Hawk and even attempts to bury Glass alive. Terrified for his own survival, Bridger goes along with Fitzgerald's betrayal. Against all odds, Glass survives and begins an extraordinary journey through brutal wilderness, driven by the need to reach civilization and confront Fitzgerald for his treasury. It's worth noting that The Revenant is actually the third film inspired by the incredible survival story of Hugh Glass. The earliest cinematic interpretation appeared in 1971 with Man in the Wilderness, directed by Richard Sarafian and starring Richard Harris. Although Harris's character was named Zachary Bass, he was clearly modeled after Glass, a frontiersman who survives a vicious bear attack only to be abandoned by his companions. While Man in the Wilderness is a solid adventure film, well made for its time, it doesn't reach the artistic or emotional heights achieved by Alejandro G. Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark Ritu's The Revenant. Far less successful was Apache Blood, 1975, an inferior and largely forgettable retelling of the same legend. Vern Peele attempted to juggle multiple roles as producer, director, and cinematographer, spreading himself too thin. In that version, a battle-worn army scout named Sam Glass is mauled by a bear, but the execution lacks credibility and impact. The bear attack scenes in particular feel awkward and unconvincing, especially compared to Man in the Wilderness, which used an actual bear and trainer for realism. Despite relying on CGI, The Revenant delivers a far more visceral and believable depiction of the attack. All three films, and Punk's novel, share the same foundational narrative. A resilient protagonist survives a devastating bear attack, is presumed dead, and is betrayed by those meant to protect him. In each adaptation, the betrayal takes a different form. In Man in the Wilderness, Percy Herbert's character abandons Harris. In Apache Blood, cowardly soldiers leave Glass behind. In The Revenant, Tom Hardy's Fitzgerald shows utter disloyalty toward Leonardo DiCaprio's Glass. Inevitably, the pacing slows as the wounded hero wanders alone through an unforgiving landscape, but this isolation is essential to the story's emotional weight. Despite moments of quiet desolation, The Revenant stands as a visually arresting and technically remarkable film, fully deserving of its 12 Oscar nominations. It saddens me when the film is casually dismissed as a remake, as though earlier interpretations never existed. John Huston's Richard Sarafian's A Man in the Wilderness was the first major effort to bring this true story to the screen, and it deserves acknowledgement. However, comparing the two films directly is difficult. They were produced decades apart under vastly different circumstances, with enormous gaps in budget, technology, planning, and cinematic tools. The Revenant was a massive, years-long production, meticulously crafted scene by scene. In contrast, Man in the Wilderness was completed in a far shorter time under harsh, real-world conditions. In keeping with that earlier preference for location shooting and practical filmmaking, Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark Ritu introduced a stronger revenge-driven arc into the narrative, which, while deviating from historical accuracy, adds dramatic intensity. The result is a lavish, carefully constructed film that showcases Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark Ritu's obsessive attention to detail and positions Leonardo DiCaprio as the emotional anchor of the entire experience. The craftsmanship is undeniable. It's a true cinematic achievement. That said, revenge as a central theme can feel thin if the audience fails to emotionally connect with either the seeker or the target of that vengeance. While revenge may be a primal and believable motivation given the harsh setting and era, it risks becoming monotonous without deeper emotional engagement. In the end, The Revenant is an endurance test both for its protagonist and its audience, culminating in a final confrontation that delivers exactly what it promises. The story centers on revenge following unimaginable brutality. A man left for dead after a savage bear attack, then betrayed by the same person who later murders his son. But does Alejandro Gonz A tilde inverted exclamation mark les Iattilde plus minus A tilde inverted exclamation mark to use this premise to explore anything meaningful about human nature? Beyond a handful of brief flashbacks that quickly inform us that Hugh Glass once had a wife who was killed, the film offers little emotional grounding. There's minimal reason to connect with Leonardo DiCaprio's character beyond sheer endurance. Tom Hardy's antagonist feels less like a layered human being and more like an exaggerated embodiment of cruelty, lacking subtlety or depth. I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. Ritchie's direction often feels overly deliberate, as though each frame is carefully posed to announce its own importance. The result, unfortunately, is a visually impressive yet monotonous experience that drags on far longer than it should. DiCaprio is almost universally expected to win an Oscar for this role, though his performance feels strikingly familiar in other variation of the same suffering-heavy roles he's played repeatedly in recent years. Much of the praise seems focused on how physically demanding the shoot was rather than the emotional nuance of his acting. In truth, the extraordinary makeup and physical transformation do most of the work for him. I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. Ritchie's Birdman remains the one film of his that truly resonated with me, and this project reinforces the sense that it may have been an exception. His worldview appears rooted in the idea that life is something to endure until redemption arrives beyond it. That philosophy simply doesn't connect with me, leaving his films emotionally distant. Keep breathing. These words are whispered early in the film by Hugh Glass to his young son, Hawk, a quiet piece of advice that echoes throughout the story. It may also serve as a subtle reminder to audiences struggling through the relentless brutality on screen. From a technical standpoint, the film is undeniably a showcase of elite craftsmanship. I tilde plus minus a tilde inverted exclamation mark. Ritchie reunites with cinematographer Emmanuel Lubezki, and together they create imagery that is both stunning and punishing in its realism. DiCaprio and Hardy abandon all traces of traditional movie star polish to deliver raw, physically grounded performances in this adaptation of Michael Punk's novel, inspired in part by true events. The opening attack by the Arikara is sudden and ferocious, immediately immersing viewers in a hostile early 19th century frontier where survival is never guaranteed. Just as the tension begins to ease, the film delivers its most infamous moment, an astonishingly brutal bear attack filmed in what appears to be an unbroken take. The encounter is visceral, relentless, and unforgettable, transforming DiCaprio's glass into a battered symbol of human resilience. Hardy brings a chilling intensity to Fitzgerald, a man driven by greed and self-preservation. His intimidation of young Jim Bridger and his confrontations with Captain Henry pulse with menace. Though his accent-heavy dialogue can be difficult to catch at times, his physical presence perfectly suits the unforgiving nature of the frontier. There are few moments of relief in this nearly 3-hour ordeal, but film history fans may briefly smile at the appearance of the name Jim Bridger. Still, smiles are rare in a movie designed to test both its characters and its audience. An Oscar win for DiCaprio would not be surprising, whether for this particular performance or for surviving the experience itself is another question entirely. This is a performance stripped of vanity, one that has nothing to do with charm or conventional appeal. It's raw, exhausting, and deeply committed. At its core, the film is a survival story and a revenge saga. But it's also a stark meditation on nature itself, a majestic in its beauty and merciless in its cruelty. Visually, the film often reaches a near-poetic quality, evoking the contemplative style of filmmakers like Terrence Malick. These serene moments are abruptly shattered by overwhelming violence, a roaring river rapids dragging glass over a waterfall, or the unforgettable image of a man and horse plunging off a cliff. The journey itself is intentionally vague in terms of time and distance, but the sheer physical punishment endured along the way is unmistakable. This is not an easy watch. It demands endurance from the audience just as it does from its protagonist. If you can resist looking away, the visuals will reward you even as they make you wince. Technically, the achievement is astonishing. Shot on location in Canada and Argentina using almost entirely natural light, the film captures textures of nature that are often ignored. Every sound, arrows cutting through air, animal growls, labored breathing, feels amplified and essential. Costumes made of animal hides add to the authenticity, and the seamless blend of practical effects and digital work makes it nearly impossible to distinguish reality from illusion. The result is a visceral experience that lingers long after the credits roll. This is a chilling, relentless tale of survival and vengeance, elevated by extraordinary atmosphere. While the story itself is relatively simple, the execution is anything but. The film proves that even a familiar narrative can become extraordinary through inspired filmmaking. Compared to other atmospheric war and survival classics, this stands apart not because of originality in plot, but because of how deeply it immerses the viewer in its world. The story follows a frontiersman betrayed by his own companions and left to die in a frozen wilderness after suffering a brutal bear attack and the murder of his son. What follows is a punishing journey driven by grief and an unyielding desire for justice. On paper, the plot may seem straightforward, but the screenplay and visual storytelling transform it into something unforgettable. It serves as a masterclass in how cinematic craft can elevate a simple premise into a powerful experience. Leonardo DiCaprio delivers one of the most physically demanding performances of his career. His commitment is undeniable, and this role stands as a defining moment, one that justifies every ounce of praise it received. Tom Hardy is equally compelling, portraying his character with a disturbing realism that makes him both repulsive and fascinating. The score heightens the tension throughout, reinforcing the cold, oppressive atmosphere of each scene. The director's achievement here is extraordinary. Winning back-to-back Best Director awards feels entirely justified in this case. While his previous film relied heavily on technical bravado, this one balances ambition with emotional weight and authenticity, making it a far more complete and deserving accomplishment. Ultimately, this is a film that demands your full attention. Watch it without distractions. Let it consume you. It's harsh, draining, and at times punishing, but also hauntingly beautiful, a modern classic that proves cinema can still be both brutal and breathtaking. The Revenant is a film that speaks far more through imagery and physical suffering than through words. Dialogue is sparse, yet the emotional and physical impact is overwhelming. Two pivotal moments in particular define Hugh Glass's relentless will to survive. The now iconic bear attack is not just shocking for its brutality but for how technically accomplished it is. The sequence unfolds with an almost documentary realism, feeling as if it were captured in a single, uninterrupted take. The combination of visual effects and raw staging makes it one of the most punishing scenes in modern cinema, rivaling even the most extreme moments of the year. The second defining moment comes later, when Glass lies helpless, barely conscious, fully aware that survival depends on endurance rather than strength. It's during this moment of vulnerability that Fitzgerald commits an unforgivable act. Leonardo DiCaprio's performance here is extraordinary, not because of dialogue but because of restraint. Without speaking, he conveys rage, sorrow, guilt, grief, and despair with haunting precision. If accolades were to come from any single scene, it would be this one. Rarely has such a range of emotion been expressed so powerfully in silence. Tom Hardy also delivers a strong performance, embodying Fitzgerald with menace and bitterness, though his vocal choices occasionally distract from the gravity of key scenes. Still, the film as a whole is relentless in its honesty. Extended takes and immersive framing place the audience directly inside Glass's suffering. The camera never looks away, forcing viewers to endure the cold, pain, and exhaustion alongside the character. From a visual standpoint, it's difficult to imagine a stronger contender for cinematography recognition. At its core, the film is built on contrast. Vast, breathtaking landscapes standing in opposition to the cruelty, greed, and betrayal that define the human conflict. Set in 1823, the story follows a group of American fur trappers ambushed by members of the Arikara tribe. After suffering heavy losses, the survivors flee under the guidance of Hugh Glass. When Glass is gravely injured by a bear, the men assigned to protect him betray their duty, murdering his son and abandoning him to die in the wilderness. From that moment on, the film transforms into a harsh survival tale fueled by vengeance. Much of the journey unfolds with minimal dialogue, allowing the environment to dominate the narrative. Snow-covered mountains, frozen rivers, and endless forests become both obstacles and silent witnesses. The film's greatest strength lies in its visual storytelling. DiCaprio's performance, while deeply committed, is also heavily supported by makeup, costume, and design teams who shape glass into a living symbol of endurance. His whispered speech, constrained by injury, reinforces the physical reality of his condition. Visually stunning and technically ambitious, the film ultimately prioritizes spectacle over historical depth. While it captures suffering with brutal honesty, it stops short of offering meaningful insight into its historical setting or deeper character exploration. Instead, it aims to overwhelm, and it largely succeeds. Directed by Alejandro González Les I written alongside co-writer Mark L. Smith and shot by Emmanuel Lubezki. The film uses long tracking shots and natural lighting to immerse the viewer in an unforgiving world. Blood dripping onto snow, labored breaths in freezing air, and the weight of every wound are lingered on with unflinching patience. The decision to shoot exclusively on real locations using only natural light pushed production to extremes, even causing delays and crew departures. Yet the final result proves the effort worthwhile, delivering a raw, elemental beauty that feels both majestic and merciless. In the end, The Revenant stands as a cinematic achievement, visually arresting, emotionally exhausting, and uncompromising in its portrayal of survival. It may not fully realize its potential as a historical drama, but as an experience, it leaves an indelible mark. Alejandro González Les I Rit uses the natural world not as a postcard backdrop but as an unforgiving force that constantly threatens to swallow you glass whole. Fleeting shafts of light filtering through snow-laden trees briefly keep glass from disappearing into icy rivers and endless whiteouts. There's a harsh irony in how beauty and brutality coexist here. Rit strips the landscape of its romantic shine and replaces it with a raw, almost journalistic intensity, shifting from the shocking ferocity of the bear attack to moments where blood and breath feel as if they're splashed directly onto the lens. Loosely drawing from Michael Punk's novel, the screenplay offers more than a survival ordeal. It frames Glass's bond with his son as a quiet, emotional anchor that lingers throughout the film like a ghost. By discarding the polished glamour often associated with revenge stories, the writers push this western into bleak, near-film noir territory. Every step Glass takes toward vengeance costs him physically and emotionally, as if the land itself is tearing pieces from him while daring him to continue. Tom Hardy delivers a deeply unsettling performance as John Fitzgerald. His portrayal strips away any hint of humanity, revealing a cold, ruthless figure whose menace seeps through every raspy, bitter line. Knowing about Hardy's intense clashes with Rit during production only adds to the sense that this performance is fueled by real friction. His Fitzgerald feels less like a man and more like a moral void carved into human form. Leonardo DiCaprio, meanwhile, commits fully to Glass with an almost frightening level of dedication. From enduring freezing water to surviving on raw food, his physical suffering becomes inseparable from the character's emotional pain. DiCaprio grounds the performance in grief, keeping the memory of Glass's son at the core of every movement. Each staggered step feels heavy and deliberate, as though revenge itself is weighing down his body. Even without dialogue, his presence communicates endurance, loss, and an unbreakable will to survive. The film's direction is visually extraordinary from the opening moments. The initial attack sequence ranks among the most immersive battle scenes in modern cinema, placing the audience directly into the chaos through expert camera work and staging. The infamous bear attack is almost unbearable to watch, prolonged, brutal, and terrifying in its realism. Narratively, the film reaches beyond simple survival. The story weaves in a strong Native American perspective, handled with a sensitivity more in line with contemporary storytelling. Notably, the most violent and morally corrupt figures are largely depicted as French trappers and soldiers, with Fitzgerald standing as the central antagonist. While compelling, some plot choices feel questionable, particularly why only two men pursue Fitzgerald and the final confrontation drifts into familiar Western territory. losing some of the thematic weight the film had carefully built. The acting across the board is solid. DiCaprio is entirely convincing in his portrayal of pain, hunger, and near-death endurance. His performance alone feels award-worthy given the sheer physical toll. The supporting cast, largely British, performs well, though some casting choices cause confusion, as several characters appear visually similar. Tom Hardy's thick accent also proves distracting at times, making portions of his dialogue difficult to understand. Many films have explored humanity's struggle against nature, but few commit to it with this level of length and brutality. Beyond the survival story lies a darker narrative of rivalry, violence, and moral decay on the American frontier. Overlaying all of this is an astonishing display of natural beauty, vast landscapes, frozen rivers, and intimate encounters with wildlife that elevate the film into something almost elemental. Overall, The Revenant stands as a gripping and punishing cinematic experience. It's not a film for sensitive viewers, those uncomfortable with graphic violence, animal death, or relentless brutality may find it overwhelming. Inspired in part by Michael Punk's 2002 novel, the film succeeds as both a survival epic and a stark meditation on revenge, endurance, and the cost of vengeance. This film tells a brutal revenge story set in a still untamed fur-trapping frontier of the Upper Missouri Territory in 1823. At the center of it all is Hugh Glass, a frontiersman whose struggle for survival drives the narrative. The storyline itself is widely known and easy to find elsewhere, so there's no need to recount it in detail here. What truly stands out instead is the strength of the performances and the craftsmanship behind the film. Every member of the cast delivers convincing work, but Leonardo DiCaprio's portrayal of Hugh Glass is especially remarkable and fully deserving of its Academy Award recognition for Best Actor. Tom Hardy is equally compelling as John Fitzgerald, turning in a performance that easily warranted consideration for a supporting actor nomination. From a technical standpoint, it's difficult to imagine another film rivaling this one in terms of visual achievement. Its sweeping imagery earned top honors for cinematography, including major awards recognizing not only the visuals but also the film itself, its sound design, and its lead performance. Although I haven't read the book the story is based on, the screenplay clearly leans into symbolism. Themes of wind, breath, and the act of breathing itself are repeatedly tied to life, endurance, and spirit. There's a strong undercurrent of mysticism and spirituality throughout the film. The production also makes extensive use of real locations, with filming taking place across parts of South America, the American Southwest, and Western Canada. Having traveled widely through the northwestern United States and much of Western Canada, I noticed that the film heavily emphasizes mountainous landscapes. While the scenery is undeniably stunning, the historical routes used by fur trappers and explorers of that era would likely have passed through gentler terrain, rolling hills and broad prairie lands, rather than near constant mountain ranges. It's a creative choice that favors visual drama over geographic accuracy. There are a few other details worth noting. Characters like Fitzgerald display remarkably precise shooting skills with primitive flintlock rifles, consistently hitting distant targets through dense forest. Additionally, there are moments, particularly during extreme close-ups of Glass, where the camera lens briefly fogs. As someone with experience in still photography, I found myself wondering why a different lens choice wasn't used. These brief visual distractions slightly break the illusion, reminding the viewer of the filmmaking process rather than the reality of the moment. Symbolism is woven into the film in subtle but powerful ways. One recurring image shows the camera pointed straight upward as wind rushes through treetops, reinforcing the theme of nature as an ever-present force. Another deeply moving moment occurs in a flashback involving Glass's Native American wife. As her lifeless body is shown, a small dove emerges from her clothing and takes flight, a fleeting yet emotionally resonant image. Despite the filmmaker's obvious dedication to realism, a few scenes reveal the use of props more clearly than intended. The most noticeable example occurs when Glass cuts open his dead horse and climbs inside it to survive the cold. At the bundle of organs he removes is clearly staged. Anyone familiar with field dressing an animal would recognize that such a mass would be far more slippery and difficult to handle. While this doesn't ruin the scene, it does briefly pull the viewer out of the experience. At the heart of the story is Glass's relentless drive to survive, whether fueled by revenge or a desire for justice after the murder of his son. Yet the film ultimately suggests a deeper moral reflection, echoed when Glass recalls the idea that vengeance belongs to God, not man. Several lines of dialogue stand out as particularly memorable, especially Glass's calm acknowledgement of death and his quiet certainty that fear cannot save those who try to outrun their fate. Overall, the director succeeds in transforming a partly historical account into a visceral cinematic experience. The film captures both the physical cruelty of the frontier and the inner endurance of a man pushed beyond normal human limits. Anchored by a powerful lead performance and extraordinary visuals, it stands as a striking achievement in modern filmmaking. The true motive behind the early violence in the film is revealed much later. The native chief's daughter, Pau Aka, has been abducted by two white men, and the chief is desperate to have her returned. As the group retreats and moves deeper into the wilderness, Hugh Glass wanders into the forest and suffers a brutal attack by a grizzly bear. This sequence stands out as one of the most intense and convincing animal attack scenes ever put on screen. It was so harrowing that I found myself watching through my fingers, completely gripped by the realism and sheer brutality of the moment. Only a handful of men survive the encounter, and they attempt to transport the badly injured Glass across the mountains. Progress is painfully slow, and the group ultimately decides to abandon him. 3 men remain behind in exchange for payment: Glass's Pawnee son Hawk, a young trapper named Jim, and John Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald, played by Tom Hardy, is portrayed as deeply antagonistic, cold, selfish, and merciless. Hardy delivers a powerful performance that makes Fitzgerald utterly detestable, a character you're almost guaranteed to despise. From this point onward, Glass's suffering intensifies. The Revenant becomes a relentless story of endurance, persistence, and survival in the face of overwhelming odds. Leonardo DiCaprio is given an extraordinarily demanding role, both physically and emotionally, and he rises to the challenge with a remarkable performance. Despite the film's lengthy runtime of 2.5 hours, I was never disengaged, and the film holds your attention from beginning to end. Visually, the film is breathtaking. The cinematography is extraordinary, capturing the harsh beauty of the natural world in a way that feels immersive and unforgiving. On visuals alone, The Revenant is worth experiencing on the big screen. Toward the end of 2015, audiences were treated to 2 impressive survival epics, The Revenant and In the Heart of the Sea. Both center on men who endure catastrophic events and find themselves isolated in hostile environments where survival seems almost impossible. The title itself is revealing. A revenant traditionally refers to someone who returns, often used to describe a ghost that comes back to haunt the living. This film, however, contains no supernatural elements. Instead, it's a western inspired by the true story of Hugh Glass, a frontiersman in the early 19th century. In 1823, Glass was part of a fur-trapping expedition when he was savagely mauled by a bear. Left for dead in uncharted wilderness, he somehow survived and later sought revenge against those who abandoned him, particularly John Fitzgerald, who not only urged others to kill Glass but also murdered Glass's son, Hawk, while the boy tried to defend his father. In this way, Glass himself becomes a living revenant, returning from near death to confront those who betrayed him. The time period is also noteworthy. Most westerns are set between 1865 and 1890, following the American Civil War, making this early 1820s setting relatively rare within the genre. While the core theme of revenge is hardly new and has long been a staple of western storytelling, Glass's journey has been adapted before. In the 1971 film Man in the Wilderness starring Richard Harris. I haven't seen that version, so I can't compare the two directly, What sets Alejandro G. I tilde plus minus H tilde inverted exclamation mark Rich's interpretation apart, however, isn't the plot itself but the way the story is told. Traditional revenge westerns tend to move quickly, building momentum toward a final confrontation. The Revenant takes a very different approach. It unfolds as a sweeping, deliberate epic, prioritizing atmosphere and survival over fast-paced action. Rather than opening with the bear attack, the film begins with a violent clash between trappers and Native Americans. Throughout much of the runtime, the focus remains on Glass's struggle to stay alive enduring extreme cold, starvation, hostile tribes, and even rival French trappers rather than on the act of vengeance itself. Leonardo DiCaprio has delivered a series of strong performances over the years, often choosing roles that differ dramatically from one another. With The Revenant, he adds yet another demanding and unforgettable performance to that list. The frontier survivor Glass couldn't be further removed from the polished, talkative figures DiCaprio has played in the past. Wealthy socialites, powerful officials, or clever tricksters. This time, his performance is almost entirely physical. For much of the film, Glass is completely alone, and even when he encounters others, he's not a man of many words. His inner world is communicated through his face, his movements, and the atmosphere surrounding him rather than through dialogue. It's a demanding role in every sense, requiring DiCaprio to endure many of the same brutal conditions as his character, plunging into freezing water, enduring harsh weather, and surviving in the wild under extreme circumstances. The recognition he received for this performance feels fully earned. That said, not every performance reaches the same level. Tom Hardy's portrayal of Fitzgerald, the film's primary antagonist, is intense but often hard to follow, as his speech can be unclear and difficult to decipher. The role reportedly had a different actor in mind early on, and it's easy to imagine how a different approach might have made the character more accessible. One of the film's most striking elements is its visual presentation. The cinematography is breathtaking, with nearly every frame looking like it belongs in a gallery. The imagery recalls classic landscape paintings, vast, overpowering, and rich with detail. Although much of the film was shot in North America, production challenges pushed some of the final scenes to snow-covered regions in South America. These locations aren't used simply to show off pretty scenery. In fact, the bleakness of late autumn and winter dominates the visuals. The result isn't traditional beauty but something far more powerful, a constant reminder of how small and fragile humans are when set against the natural world. This sense of scale makes Glass's survival feel even more extraordinary. I truly hope this film receives lasting recognition. To me, this is cinema as art. The cinematography alone is among the best I've ever seen. I honestly felt like I could pause the movie at almost any moment and capture a frame worthy of hanging on a wall. The direction is just as impressive. There are extended moments where very little happens on the surface, yet the scenes remain completely absorbing because of how they're staged and shot. I repeatedly found myself wondering who was behind the camera, because the creative vision was so strong. The acting, particularly from the two leads, is exceptional. Beyond that, the film stands out as one of the most intense and emotionally raw experiences I've had watching a movie. I was constantly tense, gripping my seat, holding my breath, and feeling genuinely uncomfortable in the best possible way.